Joining me today is Mike Gonzalez, a senior fellow in the Center for Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me on. It's a real honor.
You are coming out with a book next month called The Plot to Change America that focuses on identity politics. Without giving any spoilers, can you talk about your book, what identity politics is and why this is a problem for our country?
Well, I mean, I don't want to give away a spoiler, but it does not have a happy ending. But we can still do something about identity politics. I remain very optimistic that we can end it. Look, identity politics is to very quickly to frame what it is. It's the breakup of American society into groups that are grounded on sex, on race, on ethnicity, even disability status, and it's the antithesis of the Enlightenment values of the sense that we have the right to free speech, the right to free association, the right to we have a freedom of conscience, the right to private property. First of all, it has two things that it does. It creates a society that is driven with power dynamics, where group is set against group, and everything is people who think in terms of identity politics. Unfortunately, many people in the cultural making institutions today and in the corporate world think in terms of groups that are set against each other's or allies. You know, that word ally keeps coming up, but we only have allies in time of war. And another thing it creates is a culture of victimhood that Jason Manning and his collaborator, surname Campbell, his first name escapes me at the moment, have written about. In a culture of victimization is one in which you catalog and curate your grievances, and you say, and you put them forward as the rationale for why you need aid and why you need attention. So what you do is you, rather than working through what has happened to you, and life is hard, rather than emancipating yourself from the problems that life throws your way, you hang on to them and you grieve, and then you say, I'm a victim, and this is why you need to pay attention to me because I'm a victim, not the way it should be, which is I have overcome the problems that others have created for me, or the problems that life has created for me. I have overcome them, and I have achieved things despite the roadblocks in my way, and I'm not a victim, I'm a victor. And that used to be the claim for being noteworthy. So identity politics creates all these problems in society, and some people some very well-intentioned people follow it because they think that we have injustices that we need to correct, and we do have injustices we need to correct. But the identity politics is not the way to do so. The identity politics is a way to create many other problems.
Now, is there any resolution to change course? As we've seen since George Floyd's death, the idea of race has become more of a talking point and more of a conversation at the national level. Just this week, congressional Democrats introduced a sweeping reform bill to address, police brutality and that conversation around the interactions between police officers and law enforcement officers and the African American community. How did identity politics, get involved with this conversation, and are there resolutions to change course moving forward?
Well, yeah, and thank you for asking that question. Police brutality is an issue that has to be dealt with. The police has to get out of the business of punishing people. They are there to protect us, and almost say that they do a very good job of protecting society. There are some really bad apples that the system needs to deal with. What I'm seeing right now, though, is that this movement that was created, the country was united in being repulsed by what happened to George Floyd. So this widespread revulsion felt by all Americans. This movement has now, in some parts of it, have metastasized in this lurch, this power grab by some members of the far left to change society in ways that are not good. We're seeing this in many ways. For example, we saw recently the firing of the Op-Ed editor at the New York Times and of the editor-in-chief of the Philadelphia Inquirer, but for daring to run columns that were opposite their editorial position, op-ed, opposite editorial, they were summarily fired because the woke people in the newsroom did not agree with the views that they published. So rather than solving problems through conversation, we're now, Dan Henninger of the Wall Street Journal has written a really good column. He says we're going to the pre-liberal idea of coercion as a way of getting your point across. Look, you mentioned my book. In my book, I go into how the last time we had coast-to-coast race rioting, which was in the 1960s, between 1965 and 1971, we have something close to 700 riots, according to one account. And we had, between 65 and 68 alone, we had hundreds of African Americans dead and hundreds of millions of dollars in property damage. What happened then was that the members of the then white liberal establishment, the Eastern establishment, panicked and allowed ideologues and activists to ram through a lot of bad ideas. And we're still living with the consequences of these bad ideas today. And people who hijacked the civil rights movement and betrayed the colorblind notion of the civil rights movement. So I think we need to use history as a guide here. Look at what happened in the 60s when people, I can name you names, like George Bundy, who was the head of the Ford Foundation, George Romney, the governor of Michigan. He created something called New Detroit, which was filled with these activists who had no support in the grassroots black community of Detroit at the time. And so we have to look at what we did back then and not repeat these problems, these mistakes.
You wrote a piece for the Heritage Foundation about how the left's brand of diversity is responsible for promoting, division within our communities. You mentioned just in the 1960s, we also saw this. So do you think the left approach now to, defunding the police is contributing to that division that we've seen before?
Well, defunding the police is a really, really super bad idea, and it will really affect the communities that most need policing, which is our impoverished areas of any color, right? That's where a lot of the problems happen. A lot of crime happens in impoverished areas. So we need for all Americans to be able to live at peace, to be able to flourish, to be able to accomplish the things we go to send our children to school in safety. And if you remove law enforcement, we're going to create problems huge. But the rich are always going to be okay. The rich will be able to if necessary, even hire private protection. The poor cannot afford to do that. But my fear is that the hard left is after something much bigger, much deeper than defunding the police. They really are after, as I say again, not being able to. They want to make it illegal to discuss what are the root causes of many of the disparities. They want to only say the disparities are caused by systemic, structural, and institutional racism. They don't want us to, for example, to talk about the success sequence, the fact that if you graduate high school or college, marry, get a house, and then have children, in that sequence, you have a much higher chance of escaping poverty than if you alter that sequence. And this is something that has united the research community in Washington. You have think tanks on the left, like Brookings, and on the right, like the Heritage Foundation, agreeing that the success sequence is something that needs to be taught. So what I fear is that what the left wants to do is to make sure that we are not discussing these things, and so we have to be very cautious at this moment about what is taking place.